Don't give up, Ma. Hold me strong.
That evening, Michael visited the river and saw a strange lady slipping into the river. Not just slipping in, she was drowning into the deepest part of the river with no one to rescue her. Her chances of living or dying now lies 100% on his hands. What would you have done if you were in Michael's shoes? Ignore her screaming like others did, or would you run into the river and save her? This is an interesting story of how one big act by Michael joined two worlds together. It joined the world of a poor fisherman and that of a powerful billionaire heiress. That day, Michael jumped down into the river, not minding his life, not minding what will happen to him next. He just wanted to save her. And this singular act of his changed his life forever. Kindly grab your seat as we dive into these interesting tales together. In the quiet fishing community of Destin, Florida, where the air always carried the smell of salt and the promise of a new day, there lived a man whose story would soon change forever. His name was Michael. At 45 years old, Michael was a man of simple means and simple dreams. His hands were rough and calloused from years of pulling fishing nets from the water. His back ached from long hours on his boat. But despite the hardships of his life, there was something in his eyes that spoke of a gentle soul, a kind heart, a spirit that refused to be broken by the struggles of poverty. But life was not always this way for Michael. 18 years ago, he was the happiest man in all of Florida. He had a wife he loved more than life itself, and she was carrying their first child. Every evening they would sit by the river, her hand in his shoulder, talking about all the things they would teach their baby, all the places they would go, all the memories they would make together. But life, as we all know, has a way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. The day his wife went into labor should have been the happiest day of Michael's life. Instead, it became the day that split his world in two. On that fateful day, Michael became a father. He held his beautiful baby girl in his arms and felt a love so powerful it took his breath away. But in the same moment, the same hour, his beloved wife took her last breath. She died immediately after childbirth, never getting the chance to hold the daughter she had carried for 9 months. With trembling lips and a broken heart, Michael looked down at his daughter and whispered her name for the first time, Annabelle. He named her Annabelle after the grandmother who had raised him with love and kindness. That day, standing in the rain with his newborn daughter pressed against his chest, Michael made a vow. He promised himself that he would never remarry. He promised that every drop of energy, every ounce of love, every moment of his life would be dedicated to raising his daughter. And for 18 long years, Michael kept that promise. Years passed like waves upon the shore. The baby became a toddler. The toddler became a child. The child became a teenager. And through it all, Michael was there, teaching her to read by candlelight when they could not afford electricity, walking her to school every morning, no matter how tired he was, holding her hand through every storm, every struggle, every tear. And now, 18 years later, Annabelle had grown into a beautiful young woman. She had her mother's radiant smile and her father's kind heart. At 18, she understood things that many adults never learn. She understood that love is not measured by the things you can buy, but by the sacrifices you are willing to make. Every day after school, while other children went home to play video games or scroll through their phones, Annabelle would rush to the market to help her father sell fish. She never complained. She never demanded expensive things like her mates. At night, when Annabelle was asleep, Michael would sometimes just stand by her door and watch her. He would thank God for blessing him with such a wonderful daughter. And then he would pray. He would pray for better days. He would pray that somehow, someday, he could give his daughter the life she deserved. Now let me take you to a different world, a world of wealth and power, a world where money flows like water and dreams come with price tags. This is Orlando, Florida. And this is Gabriella. At 35 years old, Gabriella was what most people would call a success story. She was a business tycoon, a real estate mogul, a woman who had built an empire with her own two hands. She owned properties all over Orlando, mansions in Florida, and investment buildings in Texas. Her bank account had more zeros than most people could count. From the outside looking in, Gabriella had everything anyone could ever want. She had houses that looked like palaces. She had cars that cost more than most people's yearly salaries. She had influence, respect, and power. But behind the expensive curtains and golden chandeliers, there was a woman who was desperately lonely. A woman who lay awake at night wondering if anyone would ever love her for who she truly was. Because Gabriella had everything except the one thing her heart desired most: true love. Over the years, Gabriella had tried to find love. She had opened her heart 6 different times to 6 different men, and 6 different times her heart was shattered into pieces. Her first boyfriend was a man named Jerry. Gabriella loved him with everything she had. She trusted him completely. She even gave him access to her finances. And how did he repay her trust? He stole $300,000 and fled to another country, leaving nothing behind but an empty bank account and a broken heart. Her second boyfriend used her connections to secure a multi-million-dollar business contract. Gabriella opened doors for him that he could never have opened himself. She introduced him to powerful people. She vouched for him. And the moment his contract was signed, he walked out of her life without even saying goodbye. Her third boyfriend was already rich. Gabriella thought maybe this one would be different. Maybe a man who already had money would not be interested in hers. But she was wrong. To him, she was nothing more than a trophy, a beautiful thing to show off and discard whenever he pleased. He never took her seriously. He never treated her with respect. The fourth relationship ended in lies, the fifth in betrayal, the sixth in disappointment so deep that Gabriella finally gave up. She told herself that true love was nothing but a beautiful lie, a fantasy sold in movies and romance novels. She decided that she would never let another man close enough to hurt her again. But every night, in the privacy of her room, Gabriella would kneel beside her bed and pray. She would ask God one question that haunted her heart. She would whisper into the darkness, asking if there was any man in this world who could love her for who she was, not for her money, not for her connections, not for what she could give him, just for her. Little did Gabriella know that God had been listening to her prayers all along, and he was about to answer in a way she never could have imagined. It was an ordinary day when everything changed. Gabriella had an important business meeting in Florida, so she drove all the way from Orlando. The meeting lasted 6 long hours, filled with negotiations, contracts, and handshakes. By the time it was over, Gabriella was exhausted, but satisfied. As she was about to begin her journey back to Orlando, a memory suddenly flooded her mind. She remembered her mother. She remembered sitting in their old kitchen in Florida, sharing a bowl of native fish soup. It was her mother's favorite meal, and the taste had stayed with Gabriella all these years. Instead of driving straight home, Gabriella decided to visit the old fishing village where her mother used to buy fresh fish. She wanted to surprise her mother with the same delicious fish they used to enjoy together. When Gabriella arrived at the river, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Most of the fishermen had already left for the day, taking their catch to sell at the market. The area was quiet, almost empty. Gabriella stepped out of her car and walked carefully toward the riverbank. Her expensive heels sank slightly into the soft earth. She spotted a fisherman in his canoe, already halfway into the river, and she began calling out to him, waving her hand to get his attention. But in that moment, Gabriella made a mistake that would change her life forever. She did not notice the slippery mud beneath her feet. In one terrible second, her foot slipped, her body lurched forward, and before she could even scream, Gabriella fell straight into the river. The water swallowed her like a hungry monster. Cold and dark, it pulled her down, down, down into its depths. Gabriella could not swim. She thrashed and kicked with all her strength, but the current was too powerful. Her heavy dress pulled her down like an anchor. Water rushed into her lungs, burning like fire. Her vision became blurry. Her strength faded with every passing second. She was drowning. The fisherman in the canoe was too far away to see or hear anything. The only other fisherman nearby had stepped into the bushes to relieve himself. There was no one to hear her silent screams beneath the water, no one to see her desperate struggle, no one to save her. Gabriella was dying, alone in a river far from home, surrounded by her wealth, but unable to buy another breath. This was it. This was how her story was going to end. But at that very moment, God sent an angel, not an angel with wings, but a simple fisherman with a good heart. From afar, Michael saw a body fall into the river. He saw the desperate splashing. He saw a hand reaching out of the water, and without thinking, without hesitating for even a single second, Michael made his decision. He threw away everything he was carrying, his fish, his nets, the tools he needed for his livelihood. None of it mattered anymore. A life was at stake. Michael ran faster than he had ever run in his life. His feet pounded against the earth. His heart raced in his chest. He did not know who was drowning. He did not know if he could save them. He only knew that he had to try. Without breaking stride, Michael dove into the river. The cold water hit him like a wall, but he did not stop. He swam deeper into the darkness, his eyes straining to see through the murky water. The water was dark and cold. Michael could barely see his own hands in front of him. His lungs screamed for air. Every second felt like an eternity, but he refused to give up. He refused to let a stranger die when he had the power to save them. And then, just when he thought all hope was lost, his fingers touched something. An arm, a body. He had found her. Michael grabbed the drowning woman and pulled her close. With strength he did not know he possessed, he kicked upward, fighting against the current, refusing to let the river claim another life. They broke through the surface of the water, and Michael gasped for air. But there was no time to rest. The woman in his arms was not breathing. He dragged her to the riverbank and laid her down on the muddy ground. Her face was pale. Her lips had turned blue. She was not moving, not breathing. Michael pressed on her stomach again and again, trying to push the water out of her lungs. He did not know proper medical procedures. He only knew that he could not let her die. Water poured from her mouth, but still she did not wake. The other fishermen finally noticed and came running. They tried everything they knew, but nothing seemed to work. The woman remained unconscious. Michael knew they were running out of time. Without a word, he lifted the unconscious woman onto his back and began to run. He ran through the village, past the houses, past the confused onlookers, until he reached the main road. He stopped the first taxi he saw and climbed in, still holding the stranger on his back. He did not know her name. He did not know who she was. All he knew was that her life was fading, and he was the only one who could help. The moment they arrived at the hospital, everything became a blur of motion. Nurses rushed out with a stretcher, doctors shouted instructions, and within seconds, the mysterious woman was wheeled into the emergency care unit. Michael stood in the corridor, dripping water onto the clean hospital floor. His clothes clung to his body, cold and uncomfortable. His entire being trembled, not from the chill, but from the fear that he might have been too late. A few minutes later, a doctor emerged from the emergency room. He walked up to Michael and explained that they needed to begin treatment immediately, but there was a problem. The hospital required payment before they could proceed. That was their policy. Michael felt his heart sink. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out all the money he had. It was not much. It was everything he had saved for weeks, the money he needed to buy fish for his business, the money he had been setting aside to pay for Annabelle's final high school exams. As Michael counted those wet, wrinkled bills, a battle raged inside his heart. This money represented everything. It was his daughter's education. It was his business. It was food on their table. If he gave it away, he did not know how they would survive. But then he thought about the woman lying in that room, a woman who would die without help, a stranger he had never met before. And in that moment, Michael made a choice that revealed the true content of his character. He handed every single dollar to the doctor, every penny he had. He gave it all away without knowing if he would ever get it back, without expecting anything in return. He simply gave it because he knew it was the right thing to do. Because to Michael, a human life was worth more than money. The medical team worked for hours, fighting to stabilize the woman, and Michael waited. He did not leave. He could not leave. He sat in the hospital reception, still in his wet clothes, praying silently for a woman whose name he did not even know. Hours passed. The sun set. The hospital grew quiet as night fell over the city. Other visitors went home to their families, but Michael remained. Late in the evening, Michael finally called his daughter. He explained that something important had happened and that he would not be able to come home that night. Annabelle was worried, but Michael assured her that everything was fine. He promised to see her first thing in the morning. They exchanged words of love, and then he ended the call. When the call ended, Michael looked around the empty reception. There were no beds, no comfortable couches, just rows of hard plastic chairs and cold hospital floors. With tired hands and an aching body, Michael began pulling chairs together. He arranged them in a row, trying to create something he could lie on. The chairs were hard and uneven. They creaked with every movement, but it was better than sleeping on the floor. Michael lay down on those cold, uncomfortable chairs. His clothes were still damp from the river. The hospital air was cold against his skin. His back ached, his muscles were sore, but he did not complain. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for the stranger he had saved. The night was long and difficult. Michael barely slept. Every time he heard footsteps, he would sit up, hoping for news, but no news came. So he would lie back down and continue his restless wait. Finally, morning came. Soft golden light streamed through the hospital windows, warming the cold waiting room. Michael was still there, still lying on those plastic chairs, looking more exhausted than he had ever looked in his life. A gentle tap on his shoulder woke him. He opened his eyes to see a nurse standing over him, a warm smile on her face. She told him that his patient was awake now. The woman he had saved was asking to see the person who had rescued him. Michael felt tears spring to his eyes. She was alive. The stranger he had pulled from the river was alive. His sacrifice had been not in vain. Michael walked into the ward with careful steps. His heart was pounding in his chest. He did not know what to expect. He did not know what to say. And there she was, sitting up in bed, looking weak, but very much alive. Their eyes met for the first time properly, and something passed between them, something neither of them could explain. Michael walked closer and introduced himself. His name was Michael Whalen, he told her. He was a simple fisherman from the community by the river, and he was the one who had pulled her from the water yesterday. Gabriella stared at him in disbelief. This humble man in wrinkled, faded clothes had saved her life. This stranger had risked his own safety to pull her from the depths of that river. She did not know what to say. The words caught in her throat as tears streamed down her face. With a trembling voice, Gabriella thanked him. She said she did not know how she could ever repay him. She asked why he had risked his own life for someone he did not even know. Michael simply shrugged and said it was what anyone would have done. But Gabriella shook her head. No, she told him, not everyone would dive into a river for a stranger. Not everyone would wait in a hospital all night for someone they had never met. He was special, she said. He was truly special. And so they began to talk. What started as a simple conversation of gratitude slowly transformed into something deeper. Hours passed like minutes as they shared their stories with each other. Gabriella told Michael about her life. She shared memories of growing up in Florida before her family moved away. She described the fish soup her mother used to make, the same soup that had brought her to the river yesterday. She talked about her businesses, her success, but also her loneliness. And when it was his turn, Michael told her about life in the fishing community. He described how Florida had changed over the years, how the fishing business had its good days and bad days. He spoke about the simple joys of life by the water. They laughed together like old friends, like people who had known each other for years instead of hours. Michael might have been poor, but he was far from ignorant. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and had a warm aura that made everyone around him feel comfortable. After several hours, the doctor came in for a final checkup. He examined Gabriella and announced with a smile that she had made a complete recovery. She would be discharged within the hour. True to the doctor's word, Gabriella was discharged an hour later. As they stepped out of the hospital into the fresh morning air, she suddenly remembered something important. Her car was still parked by the river where she had fallen. Michael offered to accompany her to retrieve it, and together they took a taxi back to the fishing community. Throughout the ride, their conversation never stopped. It was as if they had a lifetime of things to say to each other. When they arrived, Gabriella's car was still there, untouched and waiting. She unlocked it and turned to Michael with a request. She wanted to drive him home. It was the least she could do after everything he had done for her. Michael hesitated at first. He was not used to such kindness, such generosity, but Gabriella insisted, and finally he agreed. As they drove through the village, people stopped to stare. They had never seen such an expensive car in their neighborhood. Children pointed and whispered, neighbors peered through windows, but Michael paid them no attention. He simply directed Gabriella to his home. When they arrived at Michael's house, Gabriella saw the reality of his life. It was a small, weathered building. The walls were cracked, the paint was peeling, the roof looked like it had seen better days. It sat in the heart of the slums, surrounded by other struggling families. But when Gabriella looked at that humble house, she did not see poverty. She saw the home of a hero, the home of a man who had sacrificed everything to save her life. Before they could even reach the door, a beautiful young woman stepped out. Her smile was bright enough to light up the entire street. She ran to her father and wrapped him in a warm embrace, then turned to greet their visitor with shy curiosity. Gabriella introduced herself and told Annabelle that her father had told her so much about her. She said that Annabelle was even more beautiful than Michael had described. As they talked, Gabriella noticed that Annabelle was not wearing a school uniform. Curious, she asked why such a young woman was at home in the middle of a school day. The question made her uncomfortable. She did not want to talk about it. She glanced at her father, embarrassed, but something in Gabriella's kind eyes made her feel safe enough to tell the truth. With a quiet voice, Annabelle explained that she had been sent home from school because her fees had not been paid, and her final high school exams were starting on Monday. The words hit Gabriella like a wave. She suddenly understood the full weight of what Michael had done. He had not just given money to save her life, he had given his daughter's school fees. He had sacrificed his child's education for a stranger. Without a moment's hesitation, Gabriella reached into her bag. She pulled out $2,000 and pressed it into Michael's hands. She told him to use this money to pay his daughter's fees and take care of his family. She begged him not to argue. Michael stood frozen, tears streaming down his weathered face. In his hands was more money than he had ever held at one time in his entire life. His voice broke as he tried to refuse, saying it was too much. But Gabriella would not take no for an answer. She reminded him that he had saved her life. He had given his last penny for a stranger. This was the least she could do in return. Annabelle could not contain herself. She threw her arms around Gabriella and hugged her tight, sobbing with joy and gratitude. For the first time in weeks, she could see a future. She could take her exams. She could graduate. That afternoon, the three of them sat together in Michael's humble home. They talked, they laughed, they shared stories. The small house felt warm with joy. It felt like family. After some hours, Gabriella knew she had to leave. She still had a long drive back to Orlando. But before she left, Gabriella gave Michael her phone number and asked him to call her when she arrived home safely. She hugged Annabelle one more time and promised that this was not goodbye. As Gabriella's car disappeared down the dusty road, Michael and Annabelle stood waving until they could no longer see it. Neither of them knew that their lives had just changed forever. That evening, Michael and Annabelle celebrated like they had won the lottery. Annabelle jumped up and down, unable to contain her excitement. She could go back to school. She could take her final exams. All their prayers had been answered. Michael sat his daughter down and told her everything. He described seeing Gabriella fall into the river. He explained how he had jumped in without thinking. He told her about giving his last money to save a stranger's life. And he shared how God had turned everything around in the most unexpected way. When he finished, Annabelle hugged her father so tight. She told him she was proud of him. She said he was the best father in the whole world. And Michael, for the first time in a long time, felt like maybe things would finally be okay. Meanwhile, as Gabriella drove back to Orlando, her mind was not on the road, it was on Michael. She could not stop thinking about him. She thought about his bravery, how he had risked his own life without a moment's hesitation. She thought about his sacrifice, how he had given his last penny without knowing who she was. She thought about his strength, how he had raised his daughter alone for 18 years without ever giving up. She thought about his handsome face, weathered by sun and hard work, but still so kind. She thought about his warm spirit, so genuine and gentle. In all her years, with all her money, Gabriella had never met a man like Michael. The moment she arrived home, Gabriella sent Michael a message letting him know she was safe, and he replied within seconds. That night, they texted back and forth until the early hours of the morning. Neither wanted to stop. Neither wanted to say goodbye. And so began something beautiful. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, but every single day, Michael and Gabriella found time for each other. During the day, Michael would be selling fish at the market, but his phone was always nearby. Between customers, he would steal moments to send Gabriella messages. He would tell her about his day, share funny stories about the other fishermen, ask about her meetings and business deals. And Gabriella, even in the middle of important business meetings, would find herself sneaking glances at her phone. Her heart would skip whenever she saw Michael's name on her screen. At night, when the world was quiet, they would video call for hours. They would talk about everything and nothing. They would share their dreams and fears. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, simply happy to see each other's faces. Sometimes their calls would last until 3 or 4 in the morning. Neither wanted to be the first to hang up. They would fall asleep with their phones still connected, waking up to see each other's sleeping faces. One night, Annabelle woke up and walked past her father's room. She saw light glowing under his door and heard soft laughter. Curious, she peeked inside. There was her father, a 45-year-old man smiling at his phone like an 18-year-old boy experiencing his first love. His eyes sparkled in a way Annabelle had never seen before. Annabelle just smiled and quietly closed the door. Her heart was full. After all these years of watching her father sacrifice everything for her, he was finally finding happiness of his own. Months passed, and the bond between Michael and Gabriella only grew stronger. Then one day, Gabriella made a decision. She called Michael and invited him and Annabelle to visit her in Orlando. She said they had been talking for so long and she desperately wanted to see them again. Michael's heart nearly burst with excitement. They had been apart for so many months, connected only by phone calls and messages. The thought of actually seeing Gabriella again made him feel like a young man again. 2 days later, Michael and Annabelle packed their bags. They did not have much to bring, but they packed their best clothes and their biggest smiles. The journey ahead would take hours, but neither of them cared. They were going to see Gabriella. The ride to Orlando was long but filled with anticipation. As they drove, the scenery changed dramatically. Simple fishing villages gave way to busy towns, then to gleaming cities with tall buildings and wide roads. Annabelle pressed her face against the window like a child seeing the world for the first time. And then they arrived in Gabriella's neighborhood. Michael and Annabelle fell silent, their mouths falling open in disbelief. They had never seen anything like this in their entire lives. The gates were enormous, decorated with gold and iron. The houses behind them were not just houses, but mansions, palaces, each one bigger and more beautiful than anything they had ever imagined. Annabelle kept pointing at different houses, each one more magnificent than the last. She whispered to her father that they only saw places like this on television and in magazines, never in real life, never in their wildest dreams. And then the taxi stopped in front of Gabriella's mansion. Michael and Annabelle could not move. They could not speak. They simply stared. The mansion stood 3 stories tall, with walls as white as clouds and windows that sparkled like crystals. The garden was a masterpiece of nature, filled with roses of every color imaginable, elegant sculptures, and a marble fountain that seemed to dance with light. They stepped out of the taxi with tears forming in their eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming awe. They felt like they had stepped into a dream. And then the door opened, and there she was. Gabriella stepped out, wearing a simple but elegant dress, her smile brighter than all the gold and marble around her. The moment she saw Michael and Annabelle, she ran toward them with open arms. She wrapped them both in the tightest, warmest embrace. They stood there hugging and laughing and crying, overwhelmed by the joy of finally being together again. Gabriella took their hands and led them inside her home. And if they thought the outside was impressive, the inside took their breath away completely. Marble floors stretched before them, polished so perfectly that they could see their own reflections. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, catching the light and scattering it into 1,000 rainbows. Paintings adorned the walls, each one looking like it belonged in a museum, and a grand staircase curved upward, leading to mysteries above. Michael and Annabelle walked through the mansion in a daze. They touched the walls gently, afraid that this might all be a dream that could shatter at any moment. Gabriella led them to the dining room where she had prepared a feast fit for royalty. The table was covered with dishes they had only ever seen in pictures, fresh fruits, exotic dishes, and drinks of every kind. They sat down and ate together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. They laughed and talked and shared stories. Despite the grand surroundings, there was nothing awkward about their gathering. They were simply 3 people who had become family. That night, after Annabelle had gone to sleep in one of the luxurious guest rooms, Michael and Gabriella sat together in the garden. The stars twinkled above them like scattered diamonds. The night air was soft and warm. They talked for hours about all the nights they had spent on video calls, about how much they had missed each other, about all the things they wanted to say but could not express through a phone screen. The next morning, the three of them made breakfast together. They moved around the kitchen like they had done this 1,000 times before, laughing at little mistakes, helping each other, simply enjoying being together. After breakfast, Annabelle excused herself to watch some movies in the living room, and Michael found himself alone with Gabriella. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. With trembling hands, Michael took Gabriella's hands in his. He looked into her eyes and began to speak. He told her that from the moment he pulled her from that river, something had changed inside his heart. He confessed that over these past months, talking to her every day, hearing her voice, seeing her face, he had fallen completely and deeply in love with her. He admitted that he was just a poor fisherman with nothing to offer compared to all her wealth, but he said his love for her was the most real and true thing he had ever felt in his entire life. Gabriella listened with tears streaming down her face, and when Michael finished, she spoke with a voice that trembled with emotion. She told him she had been waiting her entire life to hear those words, not from a rich man, not from a powerful man, but from a man who would love her for who she truly was. She confessed that she had loved him since the very first moment in the hospital when he told her his name. She said she had never met anyone like him, a man who would risk his life for a stranger, a man who would give his last penny without expecting anything in return, a man whose heart was worth more than all the money in the world. They held each other and cried, not tears of sadness, but tears of relief, tears of joy. Tears of two broken hearts that had finally found their way home to each other. A few days later, while still in Orlando, Annabelle received her high school results. The moment she saw them, she screamed with happiness. She had passed with excellent grades. All her hard work, all her struggles, all her prayers had finally paid off. Michael lifted his daughter in the air, spinning her around while Gabriella cheered and clapped. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered happiness. But the surprises did not end there. Gabriella handed Annabelle an envelope containing enrollment documents for one of the best universities in Orlando. Full scholarship, everything taken care of. Annabelle could not believe her eyes. The girl who had been sent home for unpaid fees was now enrolled in a university she could never have dreamed of attending. And Gabriella was not finished. She opened a massive cold room business for Michael, not a small shop, but a real company. Trucks bore his name as they transported fish and meat across the country. He was now importing and exporting products internationally. In less than 6 months, Michael's life had transformed completely. The man who once struggled to pay school fees was now a successful businessman. The fisherman who used to sell his catch by the river now owned a company that supplied restaurants and markets across multiple states. He even bought his first brand new car. Sometimes he would just sit inside it and cry, overwhelmed by how far God had brought him. One special evening, Michael arranged an intimate dinner celebration for his new car. It was just the three of them, candles flickering, roses arranged beautifully, soft music playing in the background. They ate and laughed and remembered their journey, from a drowning stranger in the river to the family they had become. Every moment felt precious. Every memory felt like treasure. And then Michael stood up. His hands were trembling, his heart was racing. Annabelle looked at him with curious, loving eyes. Slowly, Michael lowered himself onto one knee. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Annabelle gasped. Gabriella's hands flew to her heart. With a voice full of love, Michael spoke from his heart. He told Gabriella that she had saved him just as much as he had saved her. She had given him hope when he had none. She had given his daughter a future. She had given him love when he thought he would never feel it again. And then he asked her the question that would change their lives forever. Would she marry him? Through her tears, Gabriella said yes, 1,000 times yes. It was a dream come true. The woman who had given up on love had finally found it in the most unexpected person, in the most unexpected place. Michael slid the ring onto her finger, and they held each other close. Annabelle took pictures, tears of joy streaming down her own face. This was her family now. This was her happiness. 1 month later, they were married in a grand and beautiful ceremony. Friends, family, and business partners filled the venue, but none of that mattered as much as the three people at the center of it all: Michael, Gabriella, and Annabelle, a family built by fate and sealed by love. When they exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye in the room. When Michael kissed his bride, cheers erupted like thunder. And when they walked down the aisle as husband and wife, it was clear to everyone that this was a love story that would last forever. And so, dear friends, our story comes to an end. Michael, a poor fisherman who had nothing but a kind heart, saved a stranger because it was the right thing to do. He gave his last penny without expecting anything in return, and God rewarded him beyond his wildest dreams. Gabriella, a billionaire who had been hurt so many times, finally found true love in the arms of a man who saw her for who she really was. Not for her money, not for her influence, but for her heart. And Annabelle, the girl who once sold fish after school and was almost denied her education, walked across that graduation stage with her parents cheering louder than anyone. This story teaches us that true love exists. It can find you when you least expect it. It can come through the most unusual circumstances. You do not need to be rich to be worthy of love. You do not need to be powerful to have a beautiful heart. Sometimes the greatest treasure a person can have is simply the kindness inside them. So